This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, or ones that have gone under the radar and passed most people by. Today, I'm going to be talking about the 1985 pseudo-sequel, Return to Oz, from Walt Disney Pictures, the only film directed by the great Walter Murch. But joining me to discuss this weird, dark fantasy film is a friend of mine, stand-up comedian, Kelly Farmer. How's it going, Kelly?
I'm great. I'm super excited to be talking about this. I told when you asked me what movie I wanted to talk about, I saw Return to Oz on the list, and I was like, that's literally my favorite movie. So.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this one, but before we get too much into it, What did you want to let the people know about yourself?
You covered it. I am a stand-up comic. I live out here in LA, doing shows all the time. We'll talk about that probably at the end. I'm mid-20s LA comic. Just plugging away at that. And so I do that at night. And then by day, I am a floral consultant for a funeral home.
Which is very appropriate for your personality, I feel like.
Thank you. I'm a little dark, but I'm doing the cute stuff.
There you go. Exactly. Which is also very appropriate for this movie, I feel like, because it's like, it's dark, but it's also like got like a real kind of floral, jovial. Yeah.
It's for kids.
It's for kids, apparently.
Supposedly. I mean, the first time I saw this, I was probably like 4 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I would have been about like 8, maybe, because I remember I've said this on the podcast before, but since it's the episode we're covering, I'll say it here again. I saw it at my cousin's house, and then didn't hear anything about it for like years, and was like, I think I dreamed that movie. Like I was like, I think I'm just misremembering something, because there's no way that there's a movie that actually exists where like it's like a sequel to Wizard of Oz, but like everyone is different and they're all kind of like nightmare versions of themselves, and Dorothy's like a little kid, and like there's Jack Skellington and a talking chicken and a steampunk robot and a moose head thing and like shock therapy and a rocket, like so I'll let you, because it's your favorite movie, so I'll let you give you the chance, give you the floor.
Well, okay, so in the past decade we've heard a lot about like the Snyder cut and like how like we want like gritty versions of fun cute things. This is a gritty version. This is like the original gritty version of a fun, cute thing.
Yeah.
It is a pseudo sequel, but it's, if you sat a kid down to watch The Wizard of Oz, like me, and then you sat them down to watch Return to Oz, they will not necessarily connect these two films as being in the same universe, because there's a lot to get into.
Yeah, they're like because this one's much closer to the original Baum novels, which
Yes.
are pretty dark. I read them when I was a kid. They're very dark. They're very like, there's a lot of nightmare fuel in both. Like the Wheelers is just something that's still just freaky as shit. But it's interesting because, for anybody who doesn't know, like the history of this movie, Disney had the rights for a long time to the Oz books, and they had been wanting to make their own Oz thing. There was like even a canceled animated, or I don't know if it was going to be animated, but it was like a musical they were going to make called Rainbow Road to Oz, and they just
which I probably would have liked.
Yeah,
that
it
would
would
have been like a fun thing too.
Yeah, it would have probably been a lot more colorful and stuff. They eventually released some of the songs for that, but eventually they Walter Murch, they went to Walter Murch and they're like, "Hey, you want to make a movie?" Because he, famous sound editor, famous just editor, like one of the maybe the goat of editing.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah, I was kind of making my Oz movie."
Rich man.
So they let him do this insane movie, and it was the 80s. So like, yeah, it can be grim, dark, whatever. Like, go for it. That's why, but they don't have the rights to the MGM movie Wizard of Oz. So it's funny because even though they kind of like allude to it a couple times with the ruby slippers, which are not in the books, they're silver slippers. They actually had to pay to like be able to say ruby slippers.
Right. Well, because no one would have thought like, oh, right, they're not, they didn't have the internet yet. They weren't thinking like, actually, they were silver slippers. They weren't ruby. And no, so the iconography is there, which is cool. And also a lot of the characters look like, when you see the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion, they look like the illustrations in the book.
Yeah, like the lion is, yeah, right. It's so cool. Like the lion is like a lion. He's not like a dude in a lion costume. He's like an actual lion.
Which, I mean, also for the imagery, like these are all practical effects for the most part. Like when you see the Cowardly Lion, he is a lion, but he's just like someone in a suit, acting like a lion, but it's not a man like in the original.
No.
He just kind of looks like a big dog. Like, it's cool. I don't know. I wish more movies looked like that now. And I'm also glad that it wasn't fully animated, that we got to see things like that in a live action movie.
Yeah, I also really, really like watching this. I was kind of blown away on just how good it looked. It has, like, it's a movie that only could exist in the 80s. The 70s, they probably would not have been able to make all these great practical things. And, after this, they would have probably just made things with, CG and stuff like that, which I don't dislike CG, but there was something just so unique and special about this. And they had a lot of the great, like, people who worked on all the kind of great practical effects stuff of the 80s, like the same people who would like build R2-D2 and all this stuff, or Will Vinton did all the claymation in this, which I really liked, all the weird claymation stuff with the Gnome King at the end when he's slowly becoming less claymation and more human as each person like gets turned into like a ornament or whatever.
Yes.
So I thought it was just one of those things. It was like movie magic, looking at TikTok. And have you seen like the way that they did that, where they have like a contortionist like roll up into a ball and walk backwards to pilot TikTok? It's so cool, right?
It's so, of course, in the original Wizard of Oz, everything is practical and tangible. And like the trees are dudes in tree suits. But this, because it's less like a stage play and it's not a musical, you get to get so much closer to all of the details and all of the characters that it just feels more real and therefore scarier.
Yes, very scary. This movie, I'm like, were you, because you saw this when you were 4, like, did you have nightmares about this forever? Like the headless lady and stuff?
No, honestly, I was more afraid of the Wicked Witch of the West in the original, just because she's a creepy lady. But I mean, yeah, this was a scary movie to watch as a kid, but I liked scary stuff. And yeah, I do, in watching it now, I think back like, why was I watching like this headless witch? That probably freaks me out the most, is that she's like Princess Mombi when she's just walking around as herself. She is like headless.
Yeah, that scene, the one scene that I was just kind of like watching this, and I had like a moment where I was like, man, kids watching this shit, was like when it's, and it's edited so well because it's Walter Murch, and it's just mommy without her head, just like sticking her arms out, and it's
Frankenstein
just,
style.
and then it just hard cuts to like going down the hallway of all of her
Yes.
heads just shrieking.
Screaming. Yeah.
It's so disturbing.
And also, I mean, like the fact that Dorothy in this is played by I'm gonna butcher her name. Is it Perusa Balk?
Yeah, you got it, Perusa Balk.
Okay, so
Yeah.
she is visibly a little kid,
Mhm.
whereas Judy Garland was much older, playing a little
Right.
kid, and I just could relate to having to sneak around,
Mhm.
like as a little kid, like maybe like trying to go get something from the fridge, like a snack, but like sneaking and having to be quiet and do that. And that scene where Dorothy's having to sneak into Princess Mombi's bedchamber and steal the key that is literally tied to her wrist, that was scary.
Right, because this isn't necessarily a horror movie. Like, there's not like blood and guts and stuff like that. But the tension that it builds, like, and like the weird, this weird, creepy imagery throughout the whole movie, like that moment when she's just trying to like untie the key from her wrist is really, really just like, it puts you on pins and needles the whole time. And I think that overall the whole movie does that really well. And it's like a lot of the story, like when she's just being wheeled before like Oz even starts, like this, it's insane that this movie starts with like, we're gonna give Dorothy shock therapy. That is wild.
I mean, the juxtaposition's crazy because the second that Dorothy in the original films shows up in Oz, she is greeted by a land of munchkins praising her.
Mm-hmm.
She is so happy. She's so excited. The first witch she comes upon is a nice witch. She is a guardian angel practically. And then Dorothy comes to Oz. The Yellow Brick Road is torn to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Oz is unrecognizable. Her first encounter with anyone is like with the Wheelers, who threaten to cut her. Literally, they say, we're going to chop you up into little pieces and throw you into the deadly desert, which, for those of you that don't know, the deadly desert turns anything that lands into it into sand. So they're like, we're going to kill you.
Yep. And that scene where one of the Wheelers goes into the deadly desert and you just see him like just slowly like a sandcastle fall apart. It's very like interesting and unique and just like truly a movie that could only exist at this point in time.
And all of like the sound design, like when he does fall into the sand, the sound of like, oh, like just.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that was one thing I was going to bring up too, because it's Murch, the sound design, I believe he's won Oscars for his sound design, other than maybe Ben Bratt. He's like maybe the all-time great sound designer. And just stuff like whenever TikTok would blink, TikTok is the robot would blink, it would make this kind of sound that was like unlike. It didn't sound like a movie sound. It sounded just like, yeah, that's what this robot in this magical robot with gears and stuff that's what his blinks would sound like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's also fun for this to have been made in 1985 because there just wasn't a lot of things like it to derive from.
Mm-hmm.
Like now, if we were to make like a surreal fantasy film, it would feel a little derivative. There would probably, at least sounds would sound like other things, but they're like, well, we've got this like little chubby round army robot. What is he going to sound like? What is that?
Yeah.
He's not like from space. He's not going to sound like C-3PO. He's like magical and a robot. So what is that like? I love TikTok especially.
Yeah,
I could talk for hours just about TikTok.
TikTok was he's so great. I was just thinking like watching this, I was like, I could see somebody just being like, back in my day, TikTok was a robot in Oz, not some kind of newfangled app. I can't think of that.
Me, literally me. No, and also his voice is so great. Everyone's voice in this. I mean, that one guy who plays like the main Wheeler is also playing like several different people in this, which that is kind of similar to the original. Is a lot of the characters in Kansas are also in Oz.
Yeah.
But that one guy playing the Wheeler is playing like, I want to say like 3 or 4 different characters, and his voice is different for each of them, which is pretty cool. Again, TikTok just
Mhm.
sounds like a little like general, but also like a robot.
Yeah, he's like a little robot butler general guy. Like and it somehow he sounds like all of those things. It's really really well done. Yeah, I'm a big fan of all of the performances in this movie. Obviously, we mentioned this is Fairuza Balk's first movie, who would go on to be
Mhm.
like a spooky goth girl in a bunch of stuff, like
Yeah.
Queen. So the adults in this are like really terrifying.
Yeah.
It does the Oz thing of like having people from Dorothy's real life show up in Oz. You have Jean Marsh, who plays Mombi, and then she's
Mhm.
also the like Nurse Ratchet character, and you have Nicole
Mhm.
Williamson, who plays the gnome, and also the doctor, who at the end they're like, by the way, that guy died. And you're like,
Yeah.
cool, he sucked. But I really like a lot of the way that that highlights the juxtaposition between Oz and the real world, and how Oz is, like in a lot of movies, Oz is this kind of weird magical place, but it's still kind of terrifying in this. Like, home
No,
is boring and terrifying. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, no, like Home originally, I keep harking back, but like you can't talk about this without talking about the original Wizard of Oz.
Hmm.
Home is just boring.
Right.
And the worst person is some lady that wants to kill your dog, but you can get away from her.
Hmm.
And then in in Return to Oz, Home is boring and uncomfortable, and you just want to go back to Oz. And because of that, now you're going to be taken to a psych ward for shock therapy because they just don't know what else to do for you.
Right. Because it's
And the adults can't be
1899.
trusted. Right, because 1899. And when he lights he like turns on a light and you're like, oh right, this is 1899.
Yep.
Of course they think that like treating this 8-year-old with shock therapy is gonna help.
Yeah. And speaking of like that, him turning on that light, I like how the beginning of this movie uses just the concept of electricity to be really terrifying, because you
Mhm.
know that Dorothy's gonna get this shock therapy, and Dorothy's like, I'm not sure about this, and her aunt, kind of leaves. And like that's one thing too that I think Walter Murch was like, yeah, I think this movie disturbed a lot of people, because in most movies the aunt comes back, she's like, oh, that place didn't seem right. But in this one, she doesn't. She just like leaves, and
Mhm.
it's like your parental figures, they can be wrong sometimes. They can leave you in these situations where you got to rely on yourself, you got to rely on your friends and stuff like that. And that's one thing he's like, yeah, that's one of the reasons this movie didn't hit. But with the electricity stuff, just when she's being wheeled down the hall,
And you
and
can hear other patients like screaming.
hmm but and
Yeah.
you just see the lights above her, and it's just like these are
Mhm.
just regular electrical lights, not a scary thing. But in that moment, because of the electricity that's running through them, because of what they represent, you're like,
Literally
oh
looming
no,
over
like,
her.
hmm
Yeah.
it's really really scary. And I think it's this interesting commentary on like the way electricity kind of taking the world by storm at that time. It's like progress can be a really good thing, obviously, like now we have electricity in our homes, whatever. But it also can be a really scary, dangerous thing. I was thinking of Oppenheimer and how it's like, oh, progress, the atom bomb, like atomic energy, cool, great, like runs things, but also blows up cities. That's not great. So I found that aspect really kind of like a weird thing and unique that I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah. The fact that like it would be so new, and they're also, this is gonna change everything, including how we heal people.
Right. It was like, have you ever seen Shutter Island?
I have not seen Shutter Island.
Okay, because there's a lot of stuff with like shock therapy and like electricity
Mhm.
and stuff in that movie too, and it, in a weird way, kind of I drew some parallels between that, but yeah. Anyway,
Which the fact that you can draw parallels between a pseudo sequel to The Wizard of Oz and Shutter Island is fun.
yeah, yeah.
It tells you a lot about this movie if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, and this is a movie where there's a lot in it. Like it's a dense movie that
Mhm.
obviously, it, like we talked about, it looks so good. The plot is very, very dreamlike. And the fact that at the end it's a chicken's egg that ends up defeating the giant evil
Yeah.
monster, and it's not a Deus Ex Machina, it's there the whole time.
Mhm. No, yeah, they know they see that Dorothy, because through all of the rocks, the Gnome King has like spies, and
Mm-hmm.
they're like, oh, by the way, she brought a chicken. And then
Yeah.
he's like, a chicken, and like you're like, why does he care that it's a chicken? Because he's allergic to eggs. Which is such a L. Frank Baum kids fever dream kind of answer, I think.
Yeah, and there is so much weird fever dream Frank Baum stuff in this that doesn't get, certainly, isn't in The Wizard of Oz, and it's certainly not in a lot of, all the more modern interpretations of Oz, anything that's kind of come out since The Wizard of Oz. Like, they're usually more kid friendly, more, even the ones that are divert a little bit, like The Wiz or something like that, or the terrible James Franco one. They all are kind of like in that same kind of like fun thing. Even when they try to be a little bit different and more mature, it's just like, it feels like the CW, doing like, hey, we're gonna do like, here's the one with Tin Man, Zooey Deschanel. It's gonna be cool and tough, and it's not that bomb, just kind of like, there's a guy with a pumpkin head and a moose thing made out of couches and ferns that flies, and it's just, so like, the logic is, it's like I said, it's dream logic where you're like, it makes sense when you're watching it, and it's kind of like this weird magical thing, but if you stop and think about it, you're like, that's weird, right? But it's so cool and fun and childlike that it really does take you back to being a kid and having this weird, cool, imaginative stuff that is fun, but also creepy and terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to walk away from like a moral here, it's, if you were to show a kid this, they'd probably take away like, oh, adults can be really scary, and you can't trust most of them.
Yeah, which is honestly kind of what I think that they were going for, is this whole thing of like, adults are like, so many movies, and like a lot, especially at the time, were like, or maybe a little bit earlier in this, but are like, make sure to listen to your parents and do everything they say, and like, blah, blah. But it's like, you know what? Sometimes adults are wrong. Adults are like not infallible. They will put you in these situations that maybe you have to like find a way out of and stuff like that, and kind of like finding your own family sometimes. And it's not saying that like her aunt and uncle are like bad people. They're just wrong, and I thought that was a really interesting, unique take for a kids movie.
Yeah, it's literally just $18.99, and they don't know any better because it's all new. And why wouldn't you listen to a doctor?
Right? Yeah, they're like, okay, we'll go to this doctor who, really creepy. Do not like him. Like 0 out of 10 on that doctor.
Well, and then can we talk about also just, so a lot of the actors that are characters in Kansas go on to be characters in Oz also.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of fun imagery and props that are in, which also just like in the original, makes it feel like maybe Dorothy was just having a fever dream.
Right.
Because that machine, the like shock therapy machine, kind of reminds us of TikTok, or the gosh, I want to say that they're maybe like, what furniture, or like, is there any taxidermy that could remind you of the Gump?
Oh, that's a good question.
And then of course Ozma, who we don't know is Ozma yet, comes in. She's dressed like a little nurse. She's about the same age as Dorothy. She greets her. You don't really know if she's real or not. And then she hands Dorothy a pumpkin because, of course, this film's taking place right around Halloween.
Yeah.
And
October 19th, 1899.
Pumpkin symbolizes Jack.
Yeah, exactly. I love when movies do that, right? Like they're not, like you said, obviously that's, something that's an artifact of the original Wizard of Oz. But, you see it in a lot of fantasy movies. One I think of a lot is Labyrinth, how if you look at all the things in her room, they're all the different creatures and things that she meets. And it's nice that they don't straight up say, hey, this was a dream. Nothing that you watched mattered. It was all just made up. But it's like, it gives you like, that's a possibility, right? It gives you, that is a possible interpretation if you want to have it. It's a valid reading, but it's also a valid reading. It's like, yeah, maybe it was magic. Maybe she did go to Oz. You can look at it either way. It gives you that option, which I really enjoy. And it's like, yeah, maybe like the first one, she went through this disaster. The first one, it was a tornado. In this one, it was a flash flood that brings her to Oz, and
Yeah.
it might have just been her hallucinating the whole time or whatever. But it also might have been a cool magical journey, and she might be talking to the mirror or whatever, but it might be Ozma.
I also just really like that she wants nothing more than to go back to Oz, and even at the end is bummed that she has to leave.
Right? Yeah,
And
she's
that's
like,
how I feel. I would want to stay in Oz. Why wouldn't you want to stay in Oz?
right. It seems way cool. Like, I mean, despite it being kind of like nightmare fuel territory,
Yeah.
with all the Wheelers and the evil rulers that are trying to take over and stuff like that, it does seem way cooler than living on a boring farm in Kansas. I mean, I guess she goes back for her family or whatever, but I don't know, man. Like the Scarecrow and TikTok and Jack Pumpkinhead, who, by the way, I feel like Jack Skellington owes that guy a royalty check, but like all these guys seem really cool, and and the Gump, I would want to hang out with all of them,
Yeah.
With all those characters I just mentioned, do you have like a standout? Is it TikTok?
It definitely is TikTok. And I think I mean, I love Jack and the Gump, and I love, Belina, the chicken. I love them all. But TikTok, I think, is probably my favorite because he is, I mean, one, he's the first kind of like adult figure that she can trust,
Mhm.
and he is just there to serve her. Like he is just like, yeah, I'm gonna protect this little girl.
Yeah.
And also, oh my gosh, I watched this recently with my uncle, and he and I love dark things and
Mhm.
love to, analyze, creepy things. So when we first meet TikTok, he explains how he ended up there. And he says something, I forget exactly what order, but it's like, I moved and like I walked until like my movement ran out, and I yelled for help until like my talking ran out, and then I thought about what to do until my thinking ran out. And
Mm.
that's what a person would do. If a person was trapped somewhere, they'd try to get out as much as they could until they couldn't move anymore, and they would try to yell for help as much as they could until they couldn't, and then they would just think like, what could I do, until they couldn't. And that happened to TikTok.
It's almost like the Count of Monte Cristo, like he's like just locked up forever, and he tries all these things, and then yeah, no. So I really love TikTok. I mean, I love all these characters, but TikTok is really cool and unique, and God, that design, it's so great, and I don't know, like all the design of this whole movie is so unique, and I think that something about Oz in general that this movie really hits on well is that it is a uniquely American fairy tale. A lot of fairy tales are very British or like very French inspired, even stuff like Alice in Wonderland, that's obviously in Britain. Even our modern American writers, people like George R. R. Martin, stuff like that, write in a very medieval English kind of story. But this is like, no, this is set in turn of the century America. And like TikTok looks like, this very steampunk kind of American thing. Jack Pumpkinhead, that's something like Halloween, that's like an American, I know it's all over the world, but like it seems like, all the stuff in this seems like really just like the kind of Midwestern folklore, and that helps set Oz apart, and this being so true to those original Oz books gives it a flavor that helps it stand out from so much other fantasy.
And no one has like a British accent.
Right, yeah, to the point where I think the girl who was cast as Ozma, Emma Ridley, had a British accent, and I think Walter Murch
cut it.
Walter Murch had his daughter overdub her, I think, honestly.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I love Ozma.
Ozma is really great. Like she just kind of like comes in and helps Dorothy out. Like she's about to get shock therapy. She's like, let's bust you out. And then she gets like washed away in the river and stuff, and comes back at the end.
Something I didn't notice until watching it just like a year ago, because I do watch this probably too often. But so when we first see Ozma and she's in her little nurse outfit, she's not wearing shoes. She's barefoot, and she is barefoot the whole time in Kansas. And when I watched it back, I was like, "Oh my god! It's because she doesn't have her ruby slippers."
Oh, okay, yeah.
At least that's what I think. I mean, why else would she be barefoot? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was a decision that the actor made, but that would make sense. Like that, that's the reason. It's like, yeah, because she doesn't have her ruby slippers, and
No.
it's interesting because it's like, oh, our in Wizard of Oz, it's like, were the ruby slippers, did they belong to Dorothy or did they belong to the Wicked Witch? But it's like, oh no, they belong to Ozma. I like that you get
Mhm.
this kind of little bit extra lore. There's a lot of weird lore in this movie that you find
Yeah,
out.
there's a lot that unless you're like really digging deep and you want to know more about Oz, that it's just going to go over your head.
Hmm.
At like a first watch, you're like, oh, who is Ozma? I and who is she in relation to the rest of Oz and the Gnome King? The yeah, it's
Because there's a lot of stuff that's like happens that's like, okay, like it references things that we know happened in Wizard of Oz. We're like, okay, cool, like ruby slippers, like the tornado, like we understand these things happen. But there's also stuff like, I remember the Scarecrow becoming king.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, they're like, oh well, the Scarecrow's king, and you're like, what?
So you're like, okay, and then so there'll be some things when like I was like, okay, is this something from the book that I don't remember? But then Dorothy was like, I don't remember her from the last one. I was like, cool, me neither. Good, we're on the
Right.
same page.
And I love that Walter Murch did that, but he was like,
Mhm.
I don't give a shit what was in the original. I just want to make it weird like the books. And it is. It's kind of you get a lot of things from the first. I want to say that Jack is maybe even in the first Wizard of Oz book or like the Land of Oz. And then a lot from the second and
Yeah, I
a
know
lot
it's
of it like
mostly
bleeds into
based on the
one.
second and third.
Yeah, okay. So then the
Ozma
second
of
and the third.
Oz, yeah, Ozma of Oz, and then Marvelous Land of Oz. Yeah.
Mhm. And that doesn't work, unfortunately. You have people going in and all they are expecting is like another musical, but then there's like things that they don't know anything about in terms of like Oz lore. So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that it didn't do well, but it is a shame.
Right. Exactly. And like a lot of times, on the podcast, I'll be like, well, why did this one fail? Like, was it just,
Mhm.
the wrong time? Was there other extenuating factors? It's like, with this one, it's like, this one was never gonna be a big box office. Like, it's, it's like people wanting to go see another Wizard of Oz movie are not wanting to go see this weird nightmare fuel strict adaptation directed by a genius madman. Like that's not something people are going to the movies to go see. So I get why this failed, but I also understand why it blew up on VHS because that's how I first saw it. Like my cousin was like, "We got to watch the sequel to Wizard of Oz." I was like, "The sequel to Wizard of Oz," and I assume that's how you watched it too.
Yeah.
So it really makes sense that it had this life cycle of it kind of becoming this weird, almost cult classic.
Yeah. No, I mean, it came out. We can look back to that time of kids films. There was a lot of just weird children's horror
Hmm.
that we don't have anymore.
Yeah, and
Oh,
it was like there's that famous Mulaney bit where they're like, yeah, they would just like make kids movies about it. Like, movies would just be about like Back to the Future could be for kids, and it's just like or like that's a movie I saw when I was a kid, like Princess
mhm.
Bride, like all it was just kind of like whatever, like just let kids watch like, and it was also the year of like Black Cauldron and all these things that were like
Yeah.
even
Also
Disney
love
was
Black
getting.
Cauldron.
That's another really good one. But it was even Disney was getting like weird and dark at this time. And that, changed obviously once we get into like the Disney Renaissance and the kind of
Yeah.
more colorful films in the 90s. But I think that's another reason why this movie really could only exist at this point in time.
Mhm. I think even if you tried to make something like that now,
Hmm.
it would be a lot different. And I feel like in just not even just kids movies, but like in a lot of superhero movies, they always try to make the villain redeemable in some way.
Hmm.
And I don't they're not the villains in this are not redeemable.
Yeah.
Mombi gets put in prison and so does the nurse for like malpractice. And
Right. Yeah. When you
and
see her at the
the
end in
doctor
jail or like that
dies.
cage, you're like, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I love the way that in like in a second she's suddenly in a cage.
Hmm.
Love that. And all of women whose heads she took, they're the ones wheeling her away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's perfect. I didn't even catch that. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, and like you said, there's a lot of like weird, unique, stylized stuff in this. And one that I wanted to talk about was the palace, which is all mirrors, right?
Yes. Oh my God.
Such a cool look. And I was like watching it this time, like, how did he shoot that? Because you don't see any reflections of any camera or any crew.
I know.
That's something you could do today by like digitally removing stuff, but there's no digitally removing something in 1985. I could not comprehend how they even shot that.
Yeah, no, okay. So all of the walls are mirrors in that one like main room
Mhm.
that they're in. And also the carpet, when they are stepping on carpet, when TikTok moves around, it's like dusty
Yeah.
because that's Ozma's palace and Princess Mommy's just like hanging out, staying there, right? Like it's not Princess Mommy's place.
No,
But
yeah.
also there's no one around because everyone's turned to stone. So it's just like gone to dust and is like gross, and there's cobwebs on things like up in the attic, and just
Yeah.
it makes me wonder also like what is Princess Mommy even doing during
She's
the
just
day?
chilling, playing
Just
her
playing.
lute, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's weird and beautiful at the same time. It's that weird combination, and it just shows how talented Walter Murch was, and I'm really bummed that he never got to make anything again. Like obviously he still worked in the industry for decades, but he never got a chance to direct another movie. He also co-wrote this movie, and he even at one point got fired from this movie after they shot it for 5 weeks. And the only reason he was able to finish it is because Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, and George Lucas all called the producers and are like, "Hey," because he had worked with all of them. Like he was part of that like new Hollywood crew. Like
They were like, you don't know how good you have it having Walter Murch work on
exactly. They're like, he worked on all the Godfather movies with me, even the ones that haven't come out yet.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you need to like rehire him. And George Lucas was even like, hey, if rehire him, and if it really doesn't work out, I will finish this movie and you can like promote it being like from George Lucas or whatever. So they're like, all right, we'll hire Murch back on. And the movie still like went, I think, way over budget and behind schedule and stuff like that.
Good.
But
I love that too, that like it was a Disney movie and they went over budget and like they didn't want him to finish making it. He just did it anyway, and I love that.
yeah, and there was like, it's interesting because this was like, I think there was 2 corporate shakeups in Disney while this movie was being made. One right before like it started, like during pre-production, because I guess it was originally supposed to shoot in like different locations, but they shot it mostly in England. And then one towards the end when I think like Eisner came in, and they were both, I think, ended up cutting the budget significantly, which is a bummer. But it's also even more impressive that this movie looks as good as it does with the slashed budget. Because if you think about something like David Lynch's Dune, which had a much bigger budget and it got it slashed,
and weirdly does not look as good as this.
it looks bad. Like say what you will about that Dune movie, it looks horrible and still kind of got that charm, but not in a way that like this. It's like it's got a charm, and it also, you're looking and you're like, how did they do this? This more like, oh, this is kind of quaint and fun. Whereas this is like, wow, it's even more impressive that you are able to make this thing on a shoestring budget, because there'll just be like random characters in the background that are like from some other Oz book, because like every minor character, like all the extras and stuff like that, they're all from the Oz novels.
Yeah, if you in that last scene that they're in Oz, and there is that actually a C-3PO reference where TikTok's all shiny at the end.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much just the end of Star Wars A New Hope, is that they're all being like rewarded, and yeah, that whole room is full of characters from the book, and you gotta like pause and just look at all of the costumes, because I don't even know how much that must have cost them to make everyone look that good.
Yeah, totally. And I keep thinking of like people complain nowadays that like, oh, like every movie that comes out now is based on something, or it's a sequel, or it's a reboot or whatever, which is like a fair criticism. But that doesn't necessarily mean that movies that are based on a pre-existing IP can't be creative and interesting and different, because obviously this proves that they can, because it is unlike anything else.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't expect a sequel to be this different. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, pseudo-sequel, but it is that different. And also I mean, once the movie came out, no one was really looking back at the old books and
Mhm.
referencing lore in the way that Walter Murch was like, look at this lore.
Yeah. The 39 movie kind of like became the thing, you know? It's like replaced what we know as Wizard of Oz. Like that's almost, it's like this is the Wizard of Oz now. Like what came before is forgotten and stuff like that. And this looks back to it.
I mean, yeah, like, oh my gosh, when Dorothy's talking about all the people that she met, she's like, oh, the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, and she's explaining, oh, well, the witch put like a hex on his axe and he cut off all of his body
Yeah.
parts, even his own head. That's from the books, but you don't get that explanation in the 39 film.
Right. I was like, I don't remember that song.
Yeah, yeah.
So you said you saw this movie when you were 4. You've mentioned that you watch it a lot. Like, what's your overall history with the movie? Did you keep watching it through your whole life, or like, did you come back to it as adults?
I would watch it. I mean, so few people know about this movie.
Yeah.
It is a cult classic, but not in the way that like a lot of other movies are cult classics. And you're
Right.
like, is it a cult anymore? If it's pretty mainstream to like The Lost Boys, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But if I mention, oh yeah, my favorite movie is Return to Oz, people are like, oh, the James Franco movie. Like everyone thinks that that's what it is, and it's
No, it's funny because I mentioned it to my roommate, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I've seen that." And I was like, "Okay, you have?" And then he came in like halfway through me
Yeah,
watching. He was
no,
like, "This is not the movie I was thinking of. There's no Franco in this."
no. And I do kind of like the James Franco film aesthetically. Like I was excited to see a very vibrant modern Oz, and then there's different little references like the horses of a different color and fun things like that. I mean, overall that movie is not great,
Right.
but I do
it's still
love
got that
Oz.
Raimi kind of magic to it.
Yeah, I just like seeing things from Oz. I like the iconography, and I don't know, I wish we had more movies exploring the depth of Oz.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so then how are you feeling about Wicked? Part 1, I guess it's going to be.
Oh, right. We do have another movie coming out exploring the depths of Oz. I have never been into Wicked.
Mm-hmm.
When I heard, I had friends in high school that were really into the musical, and we'd sing songs from it, but I never knew like what the plot was. And they were like, "Oh, well, they're like in college," and I was like, "Stop! No, I do not want to live in a world where there's college and being popular in college within Oz. That just felt too real life."
Right. Yeah.
Which I think, especially, I'm coming from loving Return to Oz. I want that to be as weird and different as possible. I don't want the school politics involved.
Yeah, it's very like bubblegum, just like, and I love Cynthia Erivo. I don't know about Ariana Grande being in the movie. Maybe she'll prove me wrong, but yeah, it doesn't have the kind of just the weirdness to this. It seems a little more corporate, and I know that obviously this is a movie that's made by the Walt Disney Corporation and whatever, but it feels like they snuck one in somehow. Like Walter Murch was able to like make this weird thing because it was the 80s, because Disney had all this change, because they're like, we've got the rights to this, and they were like, we really got to make this now because these movies are about to enter, or the books are about to enter the public domain. So like, we got to push this thing out. He really wants to make this. It lines up. Let's do this. Which is why, a couple years after this, you start to see so many of those like James Franco, Wicked, like all the things, because those original Baum novels all enter the public domain. So you're able to make all these different movies. And some of them are like, they're like, there's even like a Muppets one. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good.
I remember the Muppets one.
Yeah. The Muppets one was fun.
No, and then you mentioned Tin Man earlier with Zoe Deschanel. I liked that too.
Yeah,
It's
I remember liking it. But it's different, but it's fun, and I really like Neil McDonough, like as the Tin Man. Like I think he's a really underrated actor.
I like anything that has to do with these kinds of characters being explored again, but I don't know. I wish that it could be kind of darker and weirder and more like what I'm used to seeing. because I also don't really consider this as much a kids movie as I do like a horror film.
Yeah, that's fair.
And this movie does things that unfortunately a lot of horror films don't do that I think they should. I feel like you could say everyone could take a page out of the Walter Murch's book.
Right.
Even some of the lines are so chilling.
What are some of your favorite lines?
I love it when I was thinking about this morning, getting ready for this talk. I was like, what am I going to bring up? And I thought about how I got chills thinking about it. Like when Princess Mombi, you get to see like a kind of literal glimmer of Ozma trapped in one of the mirrored walls. And you don't know that it's Ozma by looking at it, but she goes, "Oh, Ozma." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, she's got her trapped." And then she says, so scary. She goes, "No one knows where you are, and soon there will be no one who even knows who you are." And that, goosebumps.
Yeah. No, Mombi is like terrifying. Like she is just like, she's really frightening. And then when you get to the Gnome King too, he's like very cordial, but like you can tell that there's just like this seething rage that he's got. And then when like he's like, Mombi, just like bow to me lower, you're like, oh, if Mombi is like scared of this dude, he's bad news.
Also, like really weird, cool, like power dynamic between them where she gets down, like kneels to him, and she says he goes lower, and so she gets lower, and by the end her face is like on the ground, and then he yells lower, and she gets up and like is scared, and then he laughs at her, which like you really didn't need any explanation leading up to it that there is a bigger bad. It's like that was enough.
Right. And there's a lot of like, speaking of like the kind of like horror in this movie, there's a lot of cuts that accentuate that. Like I mentioned a few earlier, but every once in a while it'll just be something like, it'll just be like, all right, they're doing something, and then it'll just like hard cut to like Mombi like riding her like chariot with the wheelers in front of her, and she's like, and the wheelers like, and they're like, they look so weird,
screaming at them and whipping them.
And it just like cuts to them for like a couple seconds, then it cuts back, and you're like, oh, that was, and you just like back to the movie, and it just like takes you like just puts you in this really weird mindset. It's like, all right, we're continuing. You're like, but what about that thing that just happened?
Yeah, and I mean, there's also like, when I think about like originally when I would watch it as a kid, I would think, wow, it really is just Mombi and the Wheelers out here in Oz, and the only quote unquote people that Dorothy comes across are all objects.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, they're all kind of, because she comes across TikTok, who, as he said, he's like not like a person, and he's happy he wasn't.
He's happy that he's not a person. Yes.
Yeah. And then you get the other two characters that she's running around with only are living because they put the magic dust on both of them.
Which, oh my god, I love that magic dust. The fact that it's just like little glittery lights that come out of the like pepper can practically.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and then also the fact that the Gump is green is cool. I could just like go on about what little things I find that are cool in this, but and then he like talks like he's from Kansas. Like he's
he's just like, whoa.
He's like, whoa. I don't know. I was. Oh my god, he talks about getting shot.
Oh yeah. So I heard a loud noise,
and then suddenly I'm being strapped to a couch. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, the Gump. What a real one. But yeah, I don't know. This is your favorite movie of all time. Do you have any other like thoughts that you want to like that encompass what you loved about it?
Oh, I'm probably going to think of a lot of other things once we're done.
Oh, that's how it always goes.
Yeah, just, it's beautiful. I mean, the details are great. All of the little references that are references that they make in Oz to Kansas. The nurse takes away her lunch pail. And then the first thing she finds, because she's probably hungry, first thing she finds is a tree with little lunch pails.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
It's not for kids in that it's so scary, but it is for kids just in the logic of everything. And that's something I love about it.
Yeah. One thing that I was thinking about watching at this time was when she goes to the first meets the Gnome King or whatever, and he's like, "You stole the emeralds from me," and I was like, "Wait a minute!" It's like is the Scarecrow like, is he like an imperialist or whatever? But then like the more that like the Gnome King talks, the more I'm like, oh no, like the Gnome King is like a robber baron, like he's like one of these guys who's like JP Morgan or like Elon Musk, who's like, I'm the creator of this. And it's like, no, like you have your workers here who like, because he's got his gnome people and he's like, this is all for me, you know, I am the, and it's like, you know, you just like own a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean that like you've actually created anything, or like that gives you like, you should have ownership of this.
Valvoline and Advanced Auto Parts have teamed up this summer to make sure that you're getting the ultimate protection. How? Valvoline full synthetic motor oils are specially engineered to provide 24 times stronger protection against engine-killing contaminants than the leading full synthetic. If you want to maximize the life of your engine, trust the ultimate protection. Trust Valvoline. Get 5 quarts of Valvoline full synthetic motor oil for only $32.99 at your local Advanced Auto Parts store today.
Elevate your game in the all-new Hyundai Santa Fe, the capable SUV that features premium interiors with available captain's chairs, available dual wireless device charging, and bold new technology, all with plenty of room for your cargo and crew. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more about the all-new 2024 Hyundai Santa Fe.
Yeah, because they're like, I mean, he's claiming that they're all his, but they're naturally occurring.
Yeah, exactly. He's just like, everything in the earth is mine. It's like, okay, buddy.
Kind of a little bit of an Alice in Wonderland reference where she's like falling down and through, and which is such a cool sequence when you see all of the like, I don't know, what look like geodes and jewels around her. And she says, you have so much. And he says, that's not the point.
Right. Yep. For these guys, a lot of these guys, it's never enough. Just more and more and more. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, and then I love that whole sequence of the game that he plays with her of, you're going to go into my ornament room because this weird Gnome King has an ornament room. And you have to like pick up an object and say Oz. And if you're right, because I've turned your friends into ornaments, that's what it is. So if you pick out an ornament and you say Oz, then they'll transform back. But if you're wrong, 3 strikes and you're out, you're done. And then they find out each of the green ornaments is someone from Oz.
Right.
Which also, when they get something wrong, they like, it's like almost like a little earthquake or like thunder. That's spooky. It's like at every turn, Walter Murch is like, what would be fucking scary to throw in right now?
Right. It feels like he intentionally put everything that people are afraid of, you know, it's like, what, like, and it's like stuff like that, you know, where it's like, what do people not like? Taking a test, you know, like that's like a thing that makes people, but it's also just like falling, you know, like that makes people uncomfortable, you know, all these like weird, disturbing things that like are like the deep-seated, like if you like took a test and like were like, what are like the main fears, you know, in America or whatever, like it would be like the top 10 would like all be in this movie, I think.
Yeah. It's also very dark. Just, I want to say that the second half of the film is just visually dark.
Yeah. Once they get away from Emerald City, it becomes like, not like dark in like a grungy bad way, but it's a different look than you are used to seeing in like a colorful Oz movie. Yeah.
It's generally not well lit. Like they're in a cave. Which is the Gnome King. And gosh, what else was it? Oh, I like the trick because one of the gnomes like goes and talks to the Gnome King and says, oh, the robot TikTok is frozen. And she goes, oh, his movement ran out. And so he lets Dorothy go in to fix it. And he's like, I was just pretending. But now we can work together. So smart.
I love when he's like, pretend to wind me up, and like she like does her like hand like a full inch above it. So good.
Cute. Yeah. I like it when he cries, and there is real green tears coming out of his big green eyes. Yeah, it's all great.
Yeah.
I say often Walter Murch couldn't go on and make different other movies because he already made a perfect movie.
It's like, all right, we did one, we're good. Like, let's hang it up. That's funny. Yeah. Well, my last thing for you before I let you go is, this is obviously a not reinterpretation, but like, reimagining, kind of continuation of a kind of classic movie. Do you have any other movies that are remakes or reinterpretations of, kind of these classic stories that you like?
I guess when I think of The Wizard of Oz, I also so closely think of Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
I like any movie that's like kid goes into a weird other world.
Right.
But there is like a version of Alice in Wonderland that I think came out in the 90s. And Whoopi Goldberg plays the Cheshire Cat.
Yeah, I remember that.
Very weird and surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that's surreal.
Yeah, I honestly love a lot of Alice stuff because it feels like it is allowed to be a little bit weirder than a lot of times the Wizard of Oz stuff, like, obviously, like, the animated one is a classic, but there have been, because that's one that went into public domain forever ago, so anyone can do whatever weird stuff they want with Alice in Wonderland. And obviously, like, Disney did their live-action remake of that one. I want to throw out, and I'm not usually a huge fan of the Disney live-action remakes, but one I wanted to throw out that I really love is, did you see the version they did of Pete's Dragon, the remake with, like, Robert Redford and all those guys in it?
No.
Okay. I highly, highly recommend it. It is one of my just, like, all-time favorite movies, and, the 70s one is fun, but, like, the remake is just, like, a masterpiece for me.
Okay. I will watch, if you like, Return to Oz, then, and you're suggesting that, I will watch it.
Excellent, thank you. But yeah, Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. This was a blast. I clearly came to the right person because I've been wanting to talk about this weird movie for years. When you said it's your favorite movie, I was like, all right, cool, let's go.
Yeah. Well, and it was either this or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is very similar in that David Fincher had plans to make a trilogy.
Right.
And then it didn't do as well as they wanted, and then we didn't get to have those other two movies. And it makes me, for both Return to Oz and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, it makes me think of that one meme video of the kid talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, and he's like, "When will you learn?" And we could have had really cool stuff, and we didn't let it happen. We didn't go see the movies, and it bums me out.
Yeah, the Dragon Tattoo one, it's such a bummer because, like, the whole reason Fincher even made that first one, because he's like, I want to make, like, an adult trilogy based on novels. And, we never got, like, we got the other one, like, there's the...
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of Girl with a Dragon Tattoo material out there to consume, but I love the David Fincher version.
Right, only one of those movies is directed by David Fincher, who's, like, one of my all-time favorite directors, and I even think, even among David Fincher's filmography, that one kind of gets short shrift sometimes. Even, like, Fincher fans don't love it like they love, like, Fight Club or whatever, but I'm like, it's such a perfect movie for me. I don't know.
I think it's much better than Fight Club.
I would agree with you. And the people are coming for us now with their torches. All the film bros are mad at us, but, that's fine. That's fine. Not everybody has to have the same opinion on every movie. Yeah. But, yeah, this was a lot of fun. Kelly, you've got some stand-up performances coming up, right?
I do. I have, let's see, thinking about when this is gonna go up. I have a show on September 14th that I am self-producing.
Nice.
That is going to be me and just a few friends. If you are to follow me on Instagram at smelly_harder, nice. Then you'll find out all about that and any upcoming shows. Yeah, that's probably the best way to find out more.
Awesome. Yeah, and then, anybody out there who, if you're a fan of Kelly's and you're listening to this for the first time, I would love for you guys to stick around and listen to some more episodes. We've got a whole backlog of almost 150 episodes now of the Underrated Movie Podcast, so find Underrated Movie Podcast, underratedmoviepodcast.com, all the apps, all the social medias. Also got a Patreon out there for some bonus podcast stuff that I've been doing. We're looking to actually do changed that up a little bit. Did a sports movie podcast called Underdogs. Season 1 of that is ending. And next up, starting soon, I'm going to be doing another bonus podcast called Across the Second Dimension, where I look at movies that were originally released and shot for 3D and watch them in a 2D format and see how they hold up. So excited for that. But yeah, thank you once again, Kelly, for coming on, and I'll see everybody next time.
Thank you for having me on. Watch all your analytics take a nosedive after this because I was so all over the place.
No, they're going to shoot up. Trust me.
Oh, okay. We'll see. All right. Thank you, Derek.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.